Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Urban Living webinar in a series sponsored by Flywire. Today, we are going to be talking about the burgeoning co-living sector. I think it's one of the most exciting asset classes in hospitality and real estate at the moment, and we're going to have an hour-long session to talk about it. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief for International Hospitality Media, and we are a publisher of B2B news websites for various sectors of the hospitality industry, and we also organise conferences and award schemes. Now, as I mentioned, this webinar series is sponsored by Flywire, which is a payment service, and we are just going to watch a very quick video about them.
Nemo Bay is a wilderness resort remotely located in the southern part of the Great Bear Rainforest, which is just off the northern tip of Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And people that come to Nemo Bay are usually looking for adventure, wilderness, for wildlife. Oftentimes guests leave in tears just feeling so moved by the place. What really appealed to us about Flywire originally was just their ease in payments for credit cards, because at the time our credit card payment was not easy by any stretch. People would have to go to the bank to do a bank wire transfer, or they'd have to call us with their credit card information. We'd have to write it down. There's a lot of room for error. And if someone had a trouble with a bank wire, we'd have to try to resolve it on our own. If not, we'd have to call the bank. It was just very complicated. There was nothing easy about our payment system. One of the great things about Flywire is it will automatically convert into their currency if they wish, and they have the option of paying by credit card or by wire transfer. And it's just a click right from their living room, right from their computer, right from their phone. So it's just made the payment process so much simpler and easier for them. I've been totally blown away with how much it really transformed our payment system for both our side of things as well as our guest side of things. Within our work week, we save about 25% of our time not having to worry about payments. It really allows us to focus on our customer care and really giving us the space and time to really focus on our guest experience. I can't say enough good things about Flywire and how it's transformed our business. We've saved money with Flywire, and just working with the Flywire team has been an absolute delight.
All right, thank you to Flywire, and that place looks fantastic. I wouldn't mind a bit of that myself. It looks great. So today's session is going to last an hour. We'd like to make it as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, please do submit them using the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get around to asking them at the end. Everybody who has registered will receive a recording of the session via email in a couple of days. So before we start the conversation, I just wanted to show a few slides to give the conversations some context. So there's been a lot going on in the co-living market over the last few months, despite the pandemic. Plenty of new entrants in the players, plenty of new players coming into the sector, lots of institutional money, some brands, some recognized brands and some new brands showing a lot of confidence in the market. Ascot, which is primarily known as a service department brand, has got a new co-living flag called Life. It's got some very ambitious opening plans for that. Moda Living, which is a big build-to-rent operator in the UK, looking to get into co-living in a big way. Yeah, generally just a lot of exciting things happening and a lot of confidence surrounding the market. It hasn't all been smooth going. WeWork had its We Live co-living venture, and it shelved that when times got tough. There's an interesting situation in Ireland where there's actually a ban on new planning consents for co-living developments. I think possibly to do with some misunderstandings and misconception about what co-living actually is, but we'll get onto that later and we'll talk about it. And then obviously recently we had the administration of the Collective, which is one of the most high profile co-living brands in the space. So we've got some fantastic people here with us to share their knowledge today. We're having a bit of trouble locating Ben, so I'm going to ask Miriam and Harry to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about what they do, and then we'll crack on with the conversation. So Miriam, would you like to go first? Welcome to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Miriam and I am here from POHA House, which is, we are operating and developing throughout Germany. So co-living, co-working, and short-term stay all in one building. But essentially it's just, we're trying to create a super convenient, sustainably driven home that fits the needs of multiple different people at multiple different stages of life. So we have our first building actually launching in Münster in April, which is a city in Germany. And then we have a few other in the pipeline coming up right after that. But yeah, this is exciting times.
Thanks, Miriam. And Harry, welcome to you.
Yeah, thanks, George. So my name is Harry Manley. I'm head of planning at Halcyon Development Partners. And Halcyon Development Partners is a best-in-class developer. So basically my role is to kind of look after the planning strategy for the business. So that's taking sites from site acquisition into planning and into construction. I also look after our engagement side as well. It's a huge priority of the business to engage meaningfully with local communities from early stages in the site acquisition point. Obviously to try and deliver buildings that are really genuinely impactful and inclusive for the local community. In terms of Halcyon, in partnership with DTZ investors, we're bringing forward over 800 co-living rooms, and that's at sites in Harrow, so all sites in London, that's at sites in Harrow, Earlsfield and Battersea. We're hoping the first building in Harrow will be launching in January next year. Now all these brought forward under the a co-living fund known as Coliv, which is managed by DTZ investors and utilises funds from both the Merseyside Pension Fund and Strathclyde Pension Fund. And beyond that, we have a number of rooms also coming forward in our planning pipeline.
Great stuff. Thank you, Harry. So I'm going to stop this screen share and we will crack on. So the topic, the headline of this session is about the sector bouncing back, but let's start by talking about the main impacts of COVID on your businesses and the sector. Harry, do you want to run us through that quickly, and then we'll move on to Miriam?
Yeah, so I think there were a couple of points I wanted to kind of pick up on that. Probably the immediate one in terms of obviously being a developer with live sites under construction is the impact on that construction process. And I think we were quite fortunate, obviously, to utilise the government advice, and we managed to kind of continue on the construction line on our projects really, and not lose too much time in respect of programme. And then I guess the second point in terms of impact on the sector was really I guess the questioning and I guess the scrutiny that's come over, especially from local authorities, and that's in respect of people asking questions about the suitability of the model in a kind of post-pandemic world. And I think we've been, I mean, in response to those questions, we've been able to answer them really, really positively. And we think the demand, certainly for the demand and the housing need is very much still there. And as shown by the recent kind of influx of institutional investment, the sector is only really going to get stronger and stronger, albeit there are a few kind of points we can kind of respond to in a post-pandemic vision, which I'm happy to kind of pick up on separately.
Thanks, Harry. And Miriam, what have been the main impacts of the pandemic on your business?
Yeah, so we're in obviously a really different stage. So I would say no like actual business has been affected by COVID, but we kind of formed right before it really broke out. So for us, it's been really battling issues across multiple different ways of partnerships and supply chain shortages and materials. Like we had one building that's in the pipeline that we are waiting on timber for the roof for forever because there's just a shortage of timber. So it's really, it really comes down to the materials and the supply chain. And for us at this stage, it's just really important to keep ourselves aligned with our brand. And despite any of these issues coming from left and right, that we remain true to that as we're building out.
Thanks, Miriam. Ben, hi, good to see you. Do you want to give us a quick intro and tell us about yourself and Mason and Fifth, and we'll crack on?
I'm so sorry for being late. I stupidly put it in my diary for tomorrow, and I'm not in anywhere particularly exotic. I'm in central London, but it does look quite nice where I'm sitting. So
Very good, yeah.
Yeah. Hi everybody, nice to see you all. Yeah, quick background to me. Founded Mason and Fifth about 5 years ago now with my business partner David Silver. We are a co-living community, residential platform underpinned by sustainability and well-being. We have a building in Bermondsey, which is our first site in London, and we are in the process of looking for sites across the city to house our ever-growing waiting list of people looking for space in our buildings and to be part of our thriving community. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me onto the panel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Ben. We mentioned that the topic of the whole webinar is looking forward, but I've started by asking the guys what the main impacts of the pandemic have been on your businesses, and you've obviously been trading through the period. So I wonder if you could just touch on that for us briefly.
I think there was a lot of talk at the beginning of the pandemic in those early days, which I think if we all cast our mind back, it was quite a scary time, and there was a lot of talk around whether or not it was actually the death of co-living, and whether or not people would ever be willing to be in close proximity with each other again or living in these types of environments. But the truth is our community's really thrived over the last 18 months. I think the fact that there were many people struggling and feeling isolated throughout this period was a stark contrast to the kind of the camaraderie and family type environment that was created within our building, and actually the idea of living in a space with other like-minded people, with the kind of services that we provide, ranging across the kind of the spectrum of well-being. We try to support our housemates across nutrition and physical fitness, mental health, and actually these kind of things have all been different areas of people's lives which have really come into focus, and things that people are spending a lot more time thinking about. So whether it's the work from home environment and the fact that our buildings and buildings like it are able to provide spaces that people can come into to work in, and that sits separately from the spaces in which you sleep and you live in, actually lend themselves really nicely towards this remote working environment that we're all seeing and becoming ever more popular. So the truth is we think that it's been actually an accelerator for the world of co-living as opposed to a hindrance, and I think it's lining us up for a really exciting future. These kind of these mixed use environments where people can live, work, socialize, are more popular than ever, and actually not just the specific environments themselves, but actually the geography of these buildings. So the idea that you don't necessarily need to be in Zone 1 in central London right by your office, but you know, people might be coming into the city 1-2 days a week, but as long as they've got that ecosystem and that space that they can live and work in, then actually it opens up the door for us as a platform to look at areas which perhaps we wouldn't have considered previously.
Mm. Thanks, Ben. Talking of this acceleration and perhaps a broadening market, co-living is very much associated with a millennial and Gen Z demographic. But Harry, do you think your target demographic is expanding as adoption of the model speeds up and people are realizing some of the benefits that Ben referred to there?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that the demographic is changing. I'd probably echo what Ben said in terms of the acceleration factor for the sector as a whole. And I think what the pandemic has really done is bring to the forefront kind of real issues around social isolation and the need for community interaction and well-being as something that's really important in housing today. And obviously, co-living, as we can all profess, has some great solutions to really help those kind of societal issues. So I wouldn't really say that the demographic has changed. I just genuinely believe that there's a strong acceleration now, and that housing need and what co-living can bring to it is much more at the forefront of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And are you noticing any nuanced differences in your target demographic from site to site? Obviously, they're all in London, but they're in quite different neighbourhoods.
Not specifically. I guess in response to that, there is obviously an evolving piece around this kind of 15-minute neighbourhood idea, and I think the idea that people live and work in a small, maybe satellite area of London, as opposed to commuting directly to one place, is probably more prevalent. I mean, in terms of how we like to design all our buildings have a real local connection in terms of how they're designed internally. But I wouldn't necessarily say that the demographic is different across the sites. But the sites will certainly feel unique and have their own appeal.
Thanks, Harry. And Miriam, you're offering quite an extensive co-working offer as well as co-living at your properties. Do you think that makes your target customer different from other co-living developments?
I think it kind of broadens the focus a little bit. So because we want to build these communities, right? And we want people to feel at home there. So someone that is living in our building could also be working remotely from co-working space in their same home. But it can also be that we have partnerships with other startups or small businesses that are inhabiting those office spaces as well. So I think we're trying to approach it, because when we're launching, coming out of this season of this pandemic, we're trying to approach it as we don't expect people to be in the office every day. We don't expect it to be 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. We really want to create a community that makes it really easy to balance your well-being with your work in the office. So whether that's coming in a few days a week or coming in every day and taking a nap in the community space every few hours, or whatever that looks like, I think we've just been trying, I guess our demographic hasn't changed, but we've just been kind of trying to prepare for the flexibility that I feel like people have leaned into through this season. Yeah.
Thanks, Miriam. I should have mentioned earlier that the LinkedIn profiles for all our panelists are in the chat if you want to carry on a conversation with them after the session, as are the details for contacting Flywire. So let's talk a bit about investment. Ben, you mentioned that during the early days of the pandemic, people were talking about the death of co-living, obviously greatly exaggerated. And it seems to me that investor sentiment has remained pretty constant through this period. It hasn't really wavered. You know, people with longer term horizons are still pretty bullish about the sector. So Ben, what have your conversations been like with potential investors, and what do you think is the general sentiment towards co-living at the moment?
Generally speaking, I think there's a huge amount of excitement towards the sector. I think a lot of people are looking at this space as being what student was 10, 15 years ago. And we all know how successful student accommodation is today. The challenge has never been about really whether or not people have doubted the sector. In my view, it's more just been a general economic and political climate that people have been wary of. I think global trends in terms of the way that people are living, the way that people are working, like we've seen a monumental shift across the board over the last 18 months. And I think investment appetite has been slightly less aggressive and people have been kind of waiting to see what happens and where everything lands. But from our experience in the last, I would say, 3 to 6 months, there's been, I mean, investor appetite has come back with a vengeance, and there's obviously some pent-up capital that hasn't been deployed over the last 18 months that is looking for a home. And to your point about sustainability, I think people are looking for long-term sustainable strategies and areas that they can look a little bit outside of the box and make sensible investment decisions. So I would say in the last 3 to 6 months, we've had more exciting conversations than ever about programmatic investment and building out a portfolio of sites which can house the community.
Thanks, Ben. Harry, two of your backers are two of the largest pension funds in the UK. I mean, they're traditionally very conservative, long-term investors. How much convincing did they need to get involved with the whole co-living movement?
Yeah, so I think as I touched on in our intro to there, they'll be brought in as part of our co-live fund, which is the world's first institutional co-living fund. Obviously, I think what that demonstrates is huge confidence in the sector, and this is from obviously a few years ago as well. And undoubtedly, I think that appeal and that strength is only going to increase. And as we're seeing, there's some of those stories you highlighted at the start of this discussion. There are more and more investors who kind of want to get into the space, and I think I'd certainly agree with in terms of what Ben was saying about the kind of the long-term sustainable outcomes. And yeah, so it's obviously the parties that we're involved with through the co-live fund have obviously taken a view on that, and I'm sure that there will be more that will join them as well.
And Miriam, are you seeing a similar picture in Germany, where serious institutional investment is comfortable with this sector? They don't see it as something too new for them?
I think it depends on which part of Germany. A lot of the areas that we're developing in it is still a new learning for them. It's a new product, but I mean, we're in the business of solving problems with our product, right? So we're trying to, when we're approaching this as like a solution for housing, then it's a different conversation, and we can kind of work from there. It's a very new model and seems somewhat disruptive to the industry in some of these cities that we're in. But when we come at it from a place of problem solving, and then problem solving for the residents as well, as far as loneliness and trying to find housing themselves, I think it kind of balances out. And I think the long game is a very positive. I think it's just taking a lot of learning, and for us, we take a lot of time educating the cities that we're wanting to enter, to, talking with the officials that we need to work with. Yeah, but I think from an investor perspective, I think there is a lot of excitement coming into the co-living industry, especially after the pandemic, especially people that are traditional hotel investors. Co-living offers the same kind of thing, but it's less risky, but it has a lot of the same kind of return. So I think in that way, from an investor perspective, I think it's really exciting times for the industry.
Thanks, Miriam. Let's talk a bit about the actual physical product. Ben, you've had an operational property that you've been at long enough to see what's worked well and what hasn't perhaps worked quite so well. What have you learned from that, and how will you be using those learnings to bring into future projects?
I think the truth is we've been iterating the product quite significantly over the last 18 months as guidelines have changed. As an example, where we were providing housekeeping as a weekly offering, where people are getting fresh linen and towels, top up with shower gel and shampoo. obviously during COVID, we had to strip that back because we couldn't have outside supplies in the building, and actually people didn't want kind of service providers in their spaces. And where we've come out on the other side is actually taking notes from what our housemates are actually looking for, and we've shipped that back to kind of housekeeping once a month. So there are learnings and adaptations that we're always trying to implement. I think at risk of repeating myself, the importance of having a versatile work environment that people can come and use, so that they have the opportunity to work from home is critical. And I think that's going to be a foundation for all buildings that we're looking at moving forward. It's really again, at risk of repeating myself, the wellness offering and the focus that has come into this area has really seen a lot of these services that we provide, a lot more interest into these services that we provide. So whether it's nutritional advice, whether it's taking part in fitness classes, whether it's relying on our head of mindfulness to kind of help ground the people that live with us and help them find a little bit of solace with an expert, which they otherwise wouldn't be able to necessarily find in the city. You know, there's a lot that these communities are able to offer in terms of people having a really safe space and a haven to live within. And we're going to be introducing these as we move forward and really trying to develop them as we go.
Thanks, Harry, how do you think if at all, the balance is shifting between unit size and provision of communal space? I think we'll move on to perception later, but I think one of the problems that the sector has got in Ireland was that a couple of initial developments had extremely small rooms and not a lot of other provision. Are you looking at bigger units in future projects or more communal space? What's the current thinking?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our sites coming forward, the vast majority of kind of our rooms are between the kind of the 16 to kind of 18 square meter mark, which we're really confident provides a good kind of private space for living in one of our co-living buildings. Obviously, coupled with that, there's lots of amenity space, and I think the overall, obviously the overall offer of the co-living building is and the value of it is really dependent on the range of spaces you provide and their fit out. But then also that needs to be coupled with a really good operational strategy as well, because there's no point in having all these spaces if it's unclear how they're going to operate or they don't really have a defined use. So I feel that we're at the moment we're at a pretty good level in terms of the sites coming forward. It's probably worth noting though that I think over the last 18 months, the kind of pandemic period, there's been a lot of reflection in terms of those amenity spaces, and I think obviously we've already touched on a proper professional workspace as part of these environments is really heightened. And I think myself, probably like many others, I think when the pandemic first hit, I was trying to use an ironing board really as a desk to do some home working from, but now obviously as part of the co-living offer, we can provide really decent workspace, almost better than many offices. So there's been a few tweaks in respect to that, but I think where we are in terms of room size and amenity offering, I think we're pretty comfortable with it's going to provide a very good degree of living options, and certainly much better than living in an equivalent kind of small house share between 4 or 5 people.
Mm-hmm. And aside from the workspace, do the other communal areas in that case need to be flexible spaces with different uses according to the time of day and maybe even the time of year?
Yeah, completely, yeah. I mean, flexibility is the key, and I mean, it's the pandemic situation was thrown upon everyone pretty quickly, and so the ability to be able to respond to an event like that and do things is what's ideal here. So whether that's kind of movable furniture or different options for private dining or classrooms, obviously there's numerous kind of different things you can do, but yeah, certainly a mindset of designing with flexibility is pretty key going forwards.
And in a city such as London, where land is very expensive, construction costs are expensive, and so on, what is your thinking on outside space and provision of that? Obviously, our weather isn't great either, so it's a balancing act.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think versatility, flexibility, really working hard to define outdoor spaces and making sure they have a use. I think there's numerous buildings I could probably point to in London that have roof terraces which are just generally undefined and lacking kind of any character, and with that they lack appeal and people don't use them. So I think spending a lot of time on your outdoor spaces and making them work really hard for activities all throughout different times of the day, whether that's your kind of your class setup in your morning, your yoga, your fitness class, but then being able to convert to a more kind of social space towards the evening with the kind of the outdoor barbecues and the kind of the seating zones. It's very important. And I think also a really kind of key edge that we really try and concentrate on is the link between the outdoor and indoor areas, and whether that's having a kitchen space which opens out onto an outdoor terrace where you can have dining, or you might have growing zones as well to grow kind of herbs that can be used in the kitchen. I think that link is very important. So you do really kind of promote the usability of the space. And they feel, and residents of the building feel, it's kind of one combined offer rather than hanging out on one or the other.
Thanks,
Harry. Also, for what it's worth, it's also dependent on the location of the buildings, because you know, there's plenty of green spaces and outdoor spaces in London, and actually sometimes I feel like when designing a building, you can be at risk of creating outdoor spaces for the sake of creating outdoor spaces, but in more peripheral locations which perhaps don't have that kind of amenity within the local vicinity, it's definitely a powerful thing to have on site.
The rooftop you're at the moment, Ben, doesn't look too shabby. So is that, if you can still be using it in the middle of November, then you're doing okay. Miriam, your pipeline includes new builds and conversions. Does the product offer differ significantly between the two?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We, so like, for example, the first building that is launching in Windsor in April, that is a new build. And so it does differ slightly from our full product offering, which will be in a different building launched later next year in Aachen, which is where our company is based. And that building is, it's a listed building. So it's a beautiful old building that we're converting, and that will have it'll have living, working, and short-term stay. And yeah, but we've kind of seen this, we were kind of trying to figure out, you know, what's the balance of standardizing our product offering and just fulfilling the needs of the area that we're in. And we found that this is kind of what we're working with Munster. There is a real housing shortage, especially for people finishing up school, in young professionals, that people, maybe they attended university there and then they want to stay. There is a real housing need. And so that building, we have, it's all studios, and they're varying of different sizes, so you can live in by yourself or with a partner. And then there's a lot of community spaces, including a big outdoor terrace that we can have events on or do outdoor activities, including well-being focused courses and things like this. And there's also like a big glass house that is all set up for co-working. That's just for the residents that live there. So it's not a separate product, but just an additional benefit. But that seems to be what is really needed in that area, versus in Aachen, where there is more of a need for all of the products that we want to offer. So there's no rule of thumb as of yet, but we're just kind of trying to really fully understand the communities that we're entering and understand those needs, and then fill them in the best way that we can.
Thanks, Miriam. Let's talk about planning, because I think it's still probably one of the major decelerants on the sector's growth. Harry, how well do planning authorities in London understand and encourage co-living, and how much does it vary from borough to borough?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does vary significantly from borough to borough. I mean, I think obviously it's a very new sector in itself, and that goes from a kind of an investment side, but also from a planning side. And so part of my role is, I guess, is one of education, and both that's kind of trying to provide an understanding of the product, but then also trying to provide how it fits into the kind of housing needs spectrum. And so I do a lot of kind of trawling through data and statistics really to kind of highlight where co-living can fit into kind of an existing housing spectrum and how it can meet local needs. So yeah, there tends to be, and I think there's a lot of preconceptions from planning authorities about kind of what co-living is. And so obviously, if you're promoting a new scheme, it's it does take a bit of time to grapple with an authority really, and get them to understand the kind of the real reason behind co-living and really what it can bring to a local area.
And in common with residential development, do co-living developments have to sign a Section 106 agreement to provide other amenities, or does it not work like that?
I mean, a co-living development it's the same as it's a planning permission as like a normal residential development, and there's an expectation that with the development there will be a delivery of other items to offset the delivery of that scheme, but also to provide benefit to the local community. I think probably the interesting point you have with a co-living scheme compared to a traditional residential development is that whereas all the units will be sold off in a traditional residential development, a co-living building it's managed by, I guess, it's a single operator. It's very vibrant. There's a lot going on site, and there's a huge opportunity for that building to kind of give back to the local community. So one of the things that Halcyon does, and is something that we've pioneered, is we've created something called a community investment program. So whereas we'll basically go and meet the local community prior to kind of site acquisition, talk about their needs, and come up with a range of kind of ideas and opportunities about how the incoming development might be able to benefit from things such as promotion of volunteering opportunities on the site, provision of space so a local group could have a coffee morning there, or perhaps it might be jobs in the development itself. So there's this huge range of benefits which a co-living building can deliver. And so that community investment program is something which we tie into the planning permission, and it does become one of those kind of Section 106 items. So I guess, in answer kind of full circle to your question, yes, there is a requirement for a Section 106, albeit I think from a personal level, I think a co-living building can do a lot more than a traditional residential development. Yeah.
And are you finding in general that the kind of education process is working, and that planners do have a basic level of knowledge and understanding now?
I think as the sector's gathering some pace, I think there's a better understanding. I think it's still very, very young. Planning is often slightly behind sometimes in terms of having an understanding, and I think as I said before, there's a bit of kind of preconceptions about what co-living is, and I know that especially, so I work primarily within the London base, but obviously further afield and more regionally in the UK, there have been different interpretations about what co-living stands for, and sometimes aspects such as the kind of the community and society benefits are lost, and people just think about it as a small, affordable, intensive housing land use, which is a shame really. So yeah, there's the educational piece is still needed, and I think as more and more schemes come forward, and there's more of an opportunity to kind of get planners around the building, to get them meeting residents, to get them really kind of understanding what the product is, that understanding should hopefully better.
Ben, does that tally with your London experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think any new product coming into the world of real estate requires an education piece, and the truth is the government and the councils who represent the government are responsible for the well-being of the people that live in the city. And unfortunately, there are situations where greedy developers, let's call them, will try and squeeze those who are perhaps less fortunate or don't have many options in the city, younger people, into smaller, unsatisfactory spaces. And then there needs to be the requisite policing around that. So, you know, the idea that the products that we're creating in this world that has been labeled co-living can actually be an enhanced lifestyle for the people that live there, is something that needs to be proved in the pudding. We're doing a lot of talking internally and with press around putting the real estate piece to one side and actually bringing the humanness into the conversation, and actually using a lot of the people that live with us as case studies to demonstrate why this kind of living environment is not only a choice for them, but is actually something which they benefit from, and is something that they would actively seek out. I think there is a misconception with a lot of the councillors and the government officials that we speak to, that you're providing something which is a compromise. People are compromising because they can't afford to live in, you know, a one-bedroom apartment, and it's on us to turn around and say, why would you live in a one-bedroom apartment and pay X amount when you can pay less and live within a vibrant community with all of the convenience and the bells and whistles akin to living in a hotel? So yeah, absolutely, I completely agree with Harry. And the truth is all of us are doing our best efforts to try and educate the powers that be. I really think that this type of community-led living will end up being a cornerstone to cities all over the world. There'll be vibrant hubs which bring a huge amount of life and energy to all areas of cities. So yeah, as you can gather, I think we're all quite excited about the future.
I want to come back to one of your points in a minute then, but Miriam, could you just tell us briefly what the situation is with planning authorities in Germany? Are they fairly educated about what you're trying to do?
I think it depends on the city, and it depends on the area and how urban it is. So in Berlin, it's they're very familiar with it, and there's a lot less of an educational process, I guess, versus in a lot of the cities that we are developing in, which is more B cities. But that education piece, I think, can end up being very, very beneficial in the long run, because then we have the opportunity to kind of communicate ourselves as someone with a solution for needs in the area, and then also someone for partnership. And so we're really about, when we're going into a new area, developing as many local partners as we can, and really learning what the community needs and what it's about and how we can serve that best. And going through this process with local governments has been kind of an avenue for that in a way. It doesn't mean it's easy or that there isn't issues or that things don't take longer than they should. But I think I think this is just a season for this, because I think beyond just being a housing solution, I think there is a huge future for co-living that's beyond millennials and Gen Z, that is more of a intergenerational serving each other, being in a community together, and just living better lives. And I think the data, I think it's not going to be long before we have a lot of data to showcase that when it comes to planning and the impact on the cities that we'll be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Miriam. Harry, do you think we're at a kind of tipping point when it comes to the image of co-living and the definition of co-living? Obviously, there's a huge amount of positives we can take, but if we only have to look at Ireland to see that it has gone wrong over there, and I'm sure that situation will rectify itself in time as the model proves itself. But for the time being, co-living is kind of a dirty word for some people over there. Do you think that the sector as a whole is doing enough to promote what it does?
I mean, I think I'd probably say really, I guess in response to that, obviously the situation in Ireland, I think in my view, there's obviously a preconception which unfortunately has kind of moved over to a kind of political spectrum as well. And I think, as you noted, there is a ban on co-living over there. I mean, I think in terms of a tipping point, I think as Miriam kind of touched on, it's going to be kind of all about data and evidence. And I think as more and more kind of co-living schemes kind of come to light, we're going to be able to put forward kind of real kind of strong credible evidence to demonstrate why co-living is a good solution to kind of housing need and how it fits into the housing spectrum. So I would hope that obviously there's lots of energy and enthusiasm for co-living at the moment, and I hope what that turns into is kind of real data then that we can use to demonstrate that, hey, this is a good thing. This is something that planning policies should be identifying and prioritizing as well.
I think what Ben said, that a lot of people still have the misconception that co-living is a compromise. That's what needs to be addressed to show that it's not a compromise. It is another good option to a selection of options for housing needs. I think that's where we need to get to.
It's not just that it's an option. The ironic thing is that people refer to co-living as this new thing that hasn't existed before, but the truth is as a species we've been co-living since the beginning of time. So whether it was when we were hunter-gatherers and we were organized into tribes to make sure that we could survive, all the way through to kind of early settlers who created communities and villages. It's only since urbanization and the fact that we've had these kind of like nuclear, sorry for the noise, it's only since urbanization and you've had these kind of like nuclear type families and nuclear living environments that have formed. All we're really doing is looking at the past and acknowledging the fact that our cities have grown faster than the ways in which our accommodation has evolved, and taking lessons from the past. Like, this isn't something new, and the reason why people are so comfortable with it and the reason why people are really thriving from living in these types of communities is because we've been doing it for millennia. So I think one of the challenges is thinking of this as something that hasn't been done before. It's not that at all. And coming back to your point about education, it's kind of bringing these themes to the forefront and helping people realize that.
Another element of the education piece is perhaps tapping into the corporate travel market and the TMCs, because I think good co-living buildings are a great option for somebody who's on project work or traveling for business in some other respect. How well aware are they of the product, and to what extent are they using it? Harry, do you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly an opportunity to increase that awareness. In respect of our forthcoming development in Battersea, we had some really good discussions with a few institutions who will have kind of visiting teachers for kind of a 3 to 4 month period, and rather than kind of putting them up in a hotel, which can be kind of fun and exciting for a week, but kind of quickly grows quite old. There's certainly an opportunity for them to have more of a home in a co-living building. I think there's a balance to be had there. Obviously, there's I guess from my perspective, the idea of a co-living building is very much a home, and it's very much a community kind of making that their home, and everyone having similar objectives for it to be a home. Whereas obviously if someone's going on holiday for a small number of days, people have different objectives and different priorities. But there's certainly an opportunity, I think, in that kind of like you kind of suggested, that kind of employment kind of placement, where someone's coming to a different city or a different or changing companies for a short period and needs that high quality and kind of convenient accommodation offers. So it's definitely an opportunity, and one I'm sure that as more and more co-living buildings come forward, that market will certainly become more aware of the sector and certainly the opportunity it provides them.
Mm-hmm. Miriam, is that a market that you're targeting at all?
So we don't have any partners as of yet, and I think that would be definitely something interesting that we would like to see how that could work. I think for us, it's just kind of balancing that with the community that we're trying to create and have thrive in the space. So we would love to, whoever's coming, whoever's staying with us, because we also do have short-term stay, we would love for them to feel like there's a space for them, that they can jump into an event and make friends, that they can meet people, that they have these experiences as well, however long they're there. But while also still protecting the heart of the community we're trying to build for people that are living there long term. So yeah, so I think it's kind of a balancing act, but definitely something that we're interested in.
Ben, did you want to pick up on that one briefly before we move on to questions?
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, the corporate travel piece, whether corporate travel buyers and TMCs are engaged with this space, and whether it's a market you're actively targeting.
I think the biggest challenge is kind of what Miriam said, is to make sure that you're able to balance your core community with any kind of transient community. So people who are coming to use your space as like a stopgap, or they're there just passing through. The truth is you've always got to come back to what the space is primarily used for, and that's as a home. And home is the most personal space that anybody occupies in their day-to-day life, and it needs to be operated and run accordingly. So for us, we're often reticent to bring in transient customers, let's say, and it's why we operate a minimum of a 3-month stay as it stands. In future buildings, we are looking at different wings or areas of the building which could be designated to a more transient customer, as we recognize there is, as you pointed out, a huge amount of value for people who are visiting a city and are looking to find themselves plugged into an ecosystem and have everything that they need on their doorstep, which you might not get when you stay in a hotel or service department. But it's something to be very mindful of, and you can risk jeopardizing the entire community sentiment if it's done wrong.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, we've got some questions in from attendees, so thanks everyone for sending those in. First one is from Mike Stapley, and he asks, on the community benefit front, are your properties open to the local community on a pop-in basis, i.e. if someone local needs a workspace for a day for a fee? Ben, do you want to kick off with that one, and then we'll ask the others?
Yeah, it's actually a nice continuation from what I was saying just before. You need the requisite scale of building, and you need to design it appropriately if you want to be having people popping in and popping out. Again, who's the primary user? The primary user is a resident, somebody who's using it as their home, and so you need to be mindful of it. Coming back to the conversation from earlier and the idea of integrating your building and your community into the local community and drawing the surrounding area in, it's absolutely key to making sure that you don't create this kind of siloed ecosystem that people feel alienated and not part of. But it has to be done properly. So it requires really careful consideration around design. It requires really considered space planning in terms of where the public are able to access versus spaces that are dedicated exclusively for the residents and people that are living there long term and call it their home. So look, moving forward, everybody bands around membership models and the idea of allowing people to come in and work for the day or use the facilities, but without the required thought, it can again jeopardize what you've created. But it's definitely something that we're looking at.
Harry, where do you stand on that? Your developments are obviously all of a very significant scale. Does that make it easier for you to have some more local interactions?
Yeah, I'd probably say so. I mean, I totally agree with Ben that it's yeah, it is slightly easier on a scale. Obviously, you can provide more space, but a considered design view is really, really necessary. Obviously, there is still a need. Sure, you have elements of kind of private spaces in the building, but saying that, what we try and do with our schemes is really create a strong kind of public offering on the ground floor levels. I think inherently a lot of people want to become kind of part of the local community, and a great way of kind of really promoting that is to bring the local community into the building and create something of a hub and a buzz about the place, and avoid what I think Ben referred to as this ecosystem silo. I totally agree with that, and I think from a kind of external perspective, obviously there could be a view that you're kind of, especially you're parachuting in with this kind of new concept, and I think to mitigate that, you need to be able to kind of welcome people into the building, and offering them an opportunity such as workspace is certainly one way to help alleviate that potential perspective.
Mm-hmm. Our next question is from Morgan Olero, and I'm going to ask this to you, Miriam, first. Morgan has asked, how do you create the sense of home? How can co-living spaces make sure they don't end up looking like a hotel?
Great question. Because yeah, I mean, I think that's very much what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to create homes, and we're trying to create experiential living that isn't just a bunch of like really cool like living rooms with hammocks. We're trying to make this interactive space, and I really think it comes from yeah, the experiential planning and the intentionality, having residents give and take part in building this community that is their community. This isn't student housing, so we also don't want to come in and have a community manager set a structure of what is community, but we really want that to grow organically, and for that to ascend any cool living interior space, but be something that is based around creating memories together, learning together, and very much in the realm of collaborating.
Thanks, Miriam. I'm just going to squeeze one more question in. Perhaps you could answer this one, Ben. David Wilson has asked, are any UK councils insisting on nationally prescribed space standards? Does this form part of the education piece to councils?
Space standards and what various councils are seeking definitely differs from council to council, and actually week to week. We are looking to create kind of a standardized blueprint along with Harry and everybody else in this space to have a lot of a clearer roadmap towards the types of spaces that we can be creating, the density that we're able to achieve, a clear route through planning. Yeah, absolutely. Right now there's a huge amount of variation from borough to borough, but standardizing that over the next kind of 6 to 12 months is top of everyone's agenda, and I think you're going to see some really interesting developments hopefully next month in the draft London plan.
Great stuff. Thanks, Ben. That hour has fairly rattled past. Thank you all for your participation today. I think it's
sorry again for being late.
No problem. It's been a great conversation about a fascinating sector. I'm just going to share my screen again and just show you a few quick slides before we sign off. Okay, so the next Urban Living webinar is this time next week, and it's about later living, another really vibrant asset class. Just wanted to tell you briefly about an event that we're hosting in Paris in January called Recharge. This will be the 4th one we've done. It moves around various European cities, and it's a really great interactive event where people get together and talk about hospitality and real estate and how things are evolving. It's a really great event. I can't recommend it enough. We've got some great sponsors, as you can see there. Details for recharge are available in the chat. And if you're interested in getting involved in that or any of our other offers, please do get in touch with my colleague Katie, whose details are there and also in the chat. Thanks for watching today. If you're active on social media, give us a follow on the channels you can see there. We'd love to engage with you. Thanks very much to Harry, to Miriam and Ben. Thanks to you guys for watching. Enjoy the rest of your days, and I'll see you all soon. We're going to leave the session open for a couple of minutes so you can take notes from anything that you saw in the chat. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.